Welcome to Make Peace with Food. I'm your host, Emily Lavoie, a certified eating psychology coach. I own a virtual private practice, and I work with clients all over the world, one-on-one and in group programs, to help heal their relationship with food and improve body image. Here at Make Peace with Food, we believe food is not your enemy, that eating should be fun and bring you joy and pleasure, not stress and guilt. To keep this a safe space, I will try my best to avoid mentioning numbers like calories and weight, as well as other potentially triggering content, but you know yourself best, so please avoid any episode topics that may not feel helpful to where you're at in your healing journey. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a replacement for medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor does it provide a client or patient relationship. Consult your own provider on any changes you're thinking about making. Today's episode is brought to you by my one-on-one coaching. If you're curious about becoming a client and want to learn more about what it looks and feels like to receive support in healing your relationship with food and improving your body image, go to my website, emily-lavoie.com, to schedule a free 30-minute Zoom consultation. Welcome to episode 9. Today, we're going to talk about some new terms that I want to introduce you to, and hopefully in your journey to heal your relationship with food and heal body image, we can start utilizing these new terms and replace some old terms that we were probably using that are kind of rooted in diet culture and keep our relationship with food maybe in the not best place ever. Before we dive into that, a little update about what's going on in my life. I have undertaken this enormous landscaping project at my house, and so this is something that I kind of do every summer, but typically I fizzle out, and I told myself, no, Emily, you're not going to fizzle out this year. You're going to finish it. And I'm starting to think like, even if I don't fizzle out, there's no way I'm going to finish this summer. It's maybe like a multi-summer, but for my friends who are homeowners, I also feel like yard work, landscaping, it's like a lifelong project. But it's like crazy because my dad has offered to help, and I'm like, yes, I would really enjoy your help, but also like you're 77. Like, should you be helping me with this stuff? Is it safe? I don't want you to get hurt. And it's crazy because when I see him like just put one foot on the shovel, it like goes into the earth so deep. And he's like, and then I'm like, I think of myself as like a pretty strong person, and I'm jumping on this damn shovel like it is a freaking pogo stick, and it is not even budging. Like, okay, anyway. So that's been kind of consuming my life. My landscaping project sent me some good vibes. I could use them. So kind of like a refresher from something that I've talked about in a previous episode. And real quick, that was just one of the things we want to avoid, or some of the terms and words we're trying to avoid using when we refer to food, whether that's we're verbally talking about food, or even when we're thinking about food, because our thoughts impact us so much. So a lot of this work is actually just re-languaging your thoughts and rewiring your brain. But we talked previously about kind of trying to avoid using words like quote unquote good and quote unquote bad when referring to food, and getting away from even using the words like quote unquote healthy or quote unquote unhealthy when thinking and talking about food, because those words are so morally charged. And I told you before that the words we want to replace, good and bad and healthy and unhealthy, or, you know, there's other words that like clean and processed, don't use those. So what we're trying to replace those words with are, instead, we want to use the words nutrient-dense foods and fun foods and play foods. Those terms are less morally charged, and they can help us to heal our relationship with food. So I hope that that is going well for you, and I hope that you are using those terms, challenging yourself to use those terms, catching yourself when you're not using those terms, and even replacing how you think. Oh, shoot, I do this all of the time. Like, I'll be like, oh, shoot, Emily, you just thought the word good or bad when thinking about a food. We don't do that anymore. We use nutrient dense and fun foods and play foods. So that relanguaging, rewriting the way our brain thinks about food. Here's your new terminology. Some of the foods that we eat, we want to refer to as convenience foods. And then opposite of convenience foods would be labor-intensive foods. So convenience foods would be maybe eating something that is prepared by a restaurant, whether you go in and eat at the restaurant and somebody else prepared it for you and you sit down and eat there, or you just grab it in a drive-thru. That is more convenient. Or it's a food item that you bought at the grocery store and you basically just open the package and eat it, or open the package and heat it up on the stovetop, heat it up in the oven, heat it up in the microwave. It doesn't take like a cutting board and a knife and a bunch of pots and pans. It's just basically ready to go, makes your life easier. Okay. And then we have labor-intensive foods, which, yeah, you probably do need several ingredients, and there's a process, and it includes chopping and cooking and maybe boiling water, but it just takes a lot more time and it's more intense. And diet culture, I roll because we hate diet culture, a lot of times leads us to believe, brainwashes us to think that convenience foods are quote unquote bad and we should be avoiding them and they're like quote unquote unhealthy. And I want to get you to a place where you allow yourself to eat convenience foods sometimes, or maybe even regularly, without feeling guilt or shame or regret, because we should have gratitude for convenience foods. There are going to be times in our life where we lean more heavily on convenience foods, and we should be able to be like, oh, I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful that convenience foods exist, because if they didn't exist, I would have to spend hours and hours at the grocery store and in my kitchen and preparing this food and then cleaning up the kitchen just to kind of like turn around and start the whole process all over again, and doing that 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. I think about, I don't know why this thought comes to my mind whenever I talk about this. My grandma, who, rest in peace, Grandma, love you so much. You were like my best friend. And like my great grandma, who I never met, but just like great grandparents, how the introduction of convenience foods or the creation of preservatives in foods and the ability to make foods shelf life, like to have, foods that have a shelf life, or like shelf stable foods, that really helped in the women's rights movement. And like our great grandmas, maybe they weren't able to work outside of the home and pursue their desires and their passions because they were, restricted to creating 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day for themselves and their husband and their children. And like, that's kind of what their life revolved around. And I think about like the way some of these clean eating accounts and the pressure that we feel to avoid convenience foods or preservatives. My great grandma, like reaching through the screen of these social media influencers' accounts, and like my great grandma just like shaking them or like strangling them and like, would you just listen to yourself? Like, I wish I could have had access to these convenience foods. I could have had a hobby. I could have pursued my passions, worked outside of the home, made such a difference in the world if I weren't kind of like trapped or enslaved to my kitchen all of the time. And like, you ungrateful little bitches, eat the convenience foods. So I don't know if that feels helpful to you or not, but I'm being ridiculous. It's okay to eat preservatives. Do I think you should eat, 100% of the foods that contain preservatives? Like, okay, maybe not. Like figuring out the balance that is right for you. And okay, this other thing that I like to say to my clients is like, do you enjoy cooking? Some people love cooking. It's like their passion. It's their hobby. It's their love language. That's how they show their family love, by creating food to nourish their bodies. They're like foodies. They enjoy the process of chopping a million ingredients. Other people are like, it's like, I would much rather spend my time doing literally anything else. I have hobbies. Like, I don't really enjoy cooking. It's not my thing. Like, own it, babe. Just, if you don't like cooking, don't put pressure on yourself to be like a Michelin star chef or whatever it's called. Just like, I don't like cooking. Therefore, I'm going to lean more heavily on convenience foods. I'm not going to feel guilty for not making every single thing from scratch. Feel like that makes me a bad person. Let's stock your house up, your freezer, your fridge, your pantry with convenience foods, because you don't like cooking and you choose to spend your time doing other things. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't say anything about your personality or your morality as a human. Okay, there's this other idea that convenience foods are like quote unquote bad, and that labor intensive foods are like quote unquote good or nutrient dense foods. If any of you ever watch Food Network, there's this lady, I think she's still on it. Her name is Ina Garten, but like she has a bunch of cookbooks, and I think her show was called The Barefoot Contessa. And I just think she's this fun East Coast lady. She's sort of sassy. I just love her. Anyway, I have some of her cookbooks, and one time, this is many years ago, I decided to make one of her recipes, and it was for this chocolate cake, and it was like 3 or 4 layer chocolate cake, and you have to like brew espresso, because espresso is one of the ingredients in the chocolate cake, and you go to all this work and like sift the flour and sift the cocoa powder and sift them together, and then like it was just this process just to make the cake. And then after you make the cake, then it was this whole other process to make the frosting for the cake and get the layers to like be flat. And literally, this is not an exaggeration. I made this 3 or 4 layer chocolate cake of the Barefoot Contessa. That damn thing took me all day long to make. It was delicious. However, I will not be ever making it again. So I'm just explaining this so that you realize that just because something is a labor-intensive food does not automatically mean it is a nutrient-dense food. Labor-intensive foods can either be a nutrient-dense food or a fun food and play food, and convenience foods are not always just fun foods and play foods. Convenience foods can be super nutrient-dense. So getting away from that like toxic thought spiral that convenience foods are always things you need to avoid, or fun foods and play foods, like letting go of those concepts and having gratitude, like I said, for convenience foods. There's going to be times in life where you need to lean more heavily on them. Personal experience. My dad he actually had a stroke. He had a really severe brain bleed. He had to have emergency brain surgery. They took out actually such a large portion of his brain that it's categorized as traumatic brain injury. And he had to completely relearn how to talk and walk and move and read. And he was in the hospital for months and months. During this time, I leaned so heavily on convenience foods. I probably was eating like exclusively convenience foods, like basically from hospital cafeterias and fast food restaurants, because my priority was helping nurse him back to health and be there for him and support him. And I have so much gratitude that I was able to lean heavily on convenience foods, because if I would have had to make labor-intensive foods during this time, that would have taken away the time I was able to spend with him. So then he's a lot better now. He talks, he walks, he does all of the things. And I got back to kind of finding that balance between convenience foods and labor-intensive foods. And I was able to spend a little bit more time making labor-intensive foods to the extent that I want, without putting pressure on myself or feeling guilty after eating a convenience food. So best of luck with this. As always, I am available for free consultations on my website. You can schedule those. It is emily-lavoie.com. Okay, love you. Bye. That's the show. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, I'd be so grateful if you take a minute to follow or subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It helps others to find the podcast and continue spreading this important information to more people who need to hear it. This podcast is made possible by paid supporters at patreon.com/makepeacewithfood. They're truly what keep this show going so that I can pay my assistant, editor, producer, and allow me to keep sharing all of this content and doing this important and needed work with you all. Go to patreon.com/makepeacewithfood to sign up for as little as $3 per month. Make Peace with Food is hosted by me, Emily Lavoie. It's produced and edited by Jake Lamore at Pathfinder. Thank you so much for your support.